Brandon,
Hey, Alan.
and welcome to Dice Over Everything.
So we are currently apart, but since the weather is nice outside, we actually went outside and played games, which works pretty well this time of year. It's fall.
Yeah, it was actually really nice. In fact, because the weather was a little bit cooler during the afternoon, the
Mhm.
weather was almost better for playing games because we didn't like boil alive in the sun.
Yes, we're in Canada for those who don't know where we're located, and we're too close to the equator apparently.
Yeah, but it was actually great. Like I think we've talked about this before, just the weather,
Mhm.
and having the breeze out there almost made it like it was almost an optimal way to play as long as you're in an area like there's not too much wind, right?
Yeah, only a bit of our terrain was blowing over. Just the big billboards were going down.
Oh
It's all right.
yeah. Oh okay. On the table that I was playing at, it was fine because there nothing was paper basically, so it was great.
Oh no, the billboards fell on your models. You just didn't notice. I put them back.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Come
okay. Oh yeah, we did play a game afterwards. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
So it's a great thing to do. Like I said, like we said before, if you are, I guess, itching to play a game in this COVID lockdown related time, do the whole like outside thing, right? You can, the board is big enough that you're generally socially distanced. You can wear a mask. The weather's nice. It's beautiful.
Hmm. It's like having a picnic, but for nerds.
Yeah, exactly.
So the game we were playing though was Infinity Code One, which we'd given one shot before, but well, we played twice because it's so quick to play. The
Hmm.
previous time we played, we got 2 games in, then we got another 2 games in an
Yep.
afternoon with a
Yep.
few people getting together.
Yeah, we had a barbecue the first time, and this time we ordered in some pizza and wings.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah,
a nice easy game
it,
to
it
sort of
really was. It really was a nerd picnic. It was great.
exactly. And yeah, the game's not as demanding as like Infinity either, so you feel like you can sort of hang out, play a bit, then take
Hmm.
a break, come back, play another game, and it's not
Yeah,
exhausting you like possibly playing. Sometimes once you play one game of Infinity, you're like, all right, that's enough for me. I've stressed my brain enough.
yeah, yeah.
So
Especially it was the I guess you could call it a nerd picnic or nerd barbecue. So we were also uh, sipping a little bit of the alcohol, which makes everything more relaxing as well.
mhm. so it's probably
Yeah,
it's
but
good.
I yeah, and I think part of what helped is our group, right? The group that was playing, obviously because of the social distancing, we didn't get like the entire huge group all at once. It was just four guys in a relatively large backyard,
Mhm.
two tables,
Yeah. So I mean, we're lucky enough to have terrain,
uh
but I was thinking of a lot
and
of
a
other people.
backyard to go and play in.
Yeah, those are a whole bunch of things that not everybody has. That I would say
Uh-huh.
actually most people we hang around within our gaming group don't have. So we count ourselves as fortunate as being able to
Hmm.
keep all that stuff. So, but once you like with Code One though, I guess the benefit is the table is not as large compared to Infinity, the normal game.
Yep.
Because well, it depends on what size game you decide to play at. Which
Hmm.
depending on the point size, unlike the regular version of Infinity, the board size changes as well. Which maybe I hope to even see with N4 that if you decide to play smaller games in the full
Hmm.
version, it would be nice if the board shrunk, but I somehow doubt that'll happen. But a big benefit of that, as I said, is that it's difficult to acquire all the terrain you want for Infinity to play, like have a really good board that's suited for Infinity. And that
Yep.
just the fact that the board gets reduced to from the typical 4x4 down to 32 by 4 feet
Uh-huh.
is really good for like minimizing the amount of terrain you need. That they now
That
sell
is
those
totally
terrain
true.
packs, and getting a few of those terrain packs, it's now possible to cover a board that size.
Yeah. So if anyone's wondering, today we're talking all about Infinity Code One and our experiences having played outside in the beautiful weather. And so yeah, so Code One basically is this newly released beginner-friendly version of Infinity, one of our favorite games. It's a sci-fi setting, and there are so many things that are really helping it sell to or make it easy to get into the game.
Yeah, because I think I've talked on previous podcasts where we brought up Infinity about
Mhm.
getting new players into the game.
Yeah.
And for those that aren't into a super hardcore game, which honestly isn't most of gamers, and the game maker Corvus Belli does know that, they've mentioned it a few times. But just
Hmm.
with more casual gaming groups, they found it really difficult to pick up all the rules.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think it would have been really
And
good if
4 is like a
Cody.
great, or sorry, Infinity in general is a great, super deep kind of game. But the rule set, the kind of idea behind the rule set was to model whatever you want to do, on a in a whatever you think you could do it conceivably in a, uh, battle between two covert ops teams, you can basically do in Infinity. But what that means is if you've got to model all these things, is you have tons of rules, right?
Yep.
And so the complication gets huge, and you have an issue with a lot, technically a lot of these miniature games. One of the hard selling points is, for someone who's, let's say, a nerd but more into board games, is the amount of setup cost, and initial investment to get into the game before you can actually start playing. And I think,
Yeah,
Code
so the
One,
good thing about
Infinite.
Infinity and Code One is that it doesn't require too many models. So on that
Mhm.
front, the barrier to entry is pretty low. But realistically, like learning the game and learning like what a lot of units do to feel sort of competent
Mhm.
at it is one of the biggest like hurdles to get over, I would say.
Yeah, and having a table full of terrain. So,
Yes.
like when you talk to someone new, right? So, just to give a general kind of overview, Infinity requires, 15 models, uh, basically 15 models, or 10 to 15 models, on each side, and then a 4 foot by 4 foot table, filled with a lot of terrain, right? So
Yeah.
when you're trying to sell this to people, like say, hey, why don't you come in and try out Infinity if they're into playing miniatures games. One of the problems is, even though 15 miniatures doesn't sound like, or 10 to 15 miniatures doesn't seem like a lot, just filling that table with terrain becomes a huge barrier for someone. Now, if they're joining your group, you can have the terrain and they don't have to get it. So then they just need the 10 to 15 models. But if you're a new group and you're like brand new to miniature gaming and you have no one else who's playing and you're trying to like get in with your friend, having that table full of terrain, which is critical, honestly, for the enjoyment and experience of the game, to make everything look pretty and awesome, like to have that true experience, is actually a lot of work. It is the biggest thing.
Yeah, and the cost I would say is possibly even more than like the starting cost to get the table on the board versus the starting
Mhm.
cost to get the miniatures on the board. Like the
Mhm.
terrain is probably more money.
It can be if you're not building it yourself, right? So you're either spending a lot of time or a lot of money, right? Like when you're talking about getting into the game, Infinity, even the base version of Infinity, um, they would sell boxes where you can get two armies that can oppose each other for like $150,
Yeah,
right?
Canadian, so even less American. Yep.
Yeah. So, uh, yeah, so that's relatively affordable to get into the, like with the miniatures. The problem is then you have to build this terrain, like a full board of terrain, which is like more than 9 buildings, right? You need, if you think about like a miniature guy is like 28 millimeter, like 9 buildings is a lot of buildings, right?
Yeah, and then you probably want maybe a dozen crate size things. They could be cars, they could be trucks, billboards,
Hmm.
but maybe even more than a dozen of things like that.
Yeah. And one of the good things about the Infinity starter boxes is they would come with the crates, right? Which was
Yep.
a great idea, except that it had quite a decent number of crates on a box. The problem is you were missing the buildings. And then if you go and buy the MDF stuff, that's like, that's that like you said, right? That's a lot more money.
Yep. But it is much better. Like the paper buildings they previously released were sort
Hmm.
of flimsy,
Hmm.
but
So what happened with Code One, though? I guess we should talk about, the switchover, and it actually happened a little bit earlier than Code One. But Code One also has a starter pack, and because Code One, of the way that the game is set up, you're basically, each side is going to have 10 miniatures. So, um, the number is actually reduced because, in the normal Infinity, it's 10 to 15 now, right? But now in Code 1, which is the simple version, it's basically a flat 10, right? Everyone just takes 10, right? Uh,
You could take less, but it's not very good. You're compromising your
yeah.
list if you take less.
Yeah, so then it becomes a lot easier, I think, for people to think about how to build their list. They're like, okay, I just need to get to 10, get the 10 models and get to 10, right? It's just
Mhm.
easier to think about. And then on
And the
top of
whole
that, yep.
the whole selection of models is also smaller since instead of
Mhm.
I think it's 9 factions, which have different sub
Yeah,
factions within them, it's now just
yeah,
reduced to 4.
and the selection of units is a lot more reduced, right? And to make it easy for people to get in, basically they've released like models, right? Like sets to get in. And so the starter set for Code 1, I think, is a really good starter set because it doesn't come quite with the full amount of models. So, but it comes with the majority of the models you'd want to play for what we believe is a full game, right? But it also comes with cardboard, hefty kind of terrain pack, right, on top. So it's a little bit
Yes.
more expensive than just the miniatures, but it comes with a box of terrain and tokens. So it basically has almost everything you need to, um, well, a lot of what you need to get going, right? It's a good starter pack, and you can kind of play some intro games, and then you just need to fill things in with a little bit more to complete your set of models. And so because it comes with those buildings, like we're talking about, right? It's a lot easier to get into the game. And I believe, yeah, the building stuff is relatively cheap for for the amount, I guess, that you get.
Yes, you'd say it gives you about maybe if you're playing a mid-sized game, which we'll talk about the sizes of games later, but for a
Mm-hmm.
mid-sized game, which is 25 points,
Mm-hmm.
if that train that comes with the pack would give you about a third of a table of terrain.
I think I
It's
think
4 buildings.
probably a little bit more than a third.
Mhm.
I think you could get away with 2 packs of it, honestly, but it would
Yeah,
be a little bit sparse.
it'd be nice to have 3 packs basically of it because
Three
they do
packs
sell
would
the
be more
packs.
than enough. The thing is, 3 packs is more than enough for a normal size game. So it's somewhere in between 2 and 3.
Mhm.
And I'd say it leans more to just like almost 50% of what you need. I'd say it's around 40%, 40, 45, maybe.
Yep, so you could get something else other than the terrain packs they specifically
Yeah.
put out at some point. So that's just how far it gets you.
Yeah. So I found the starter packs really good intro to the game. They're much more balanced. The starter pack, it's called Operation Coldstrom.
Mhm.
I feel like the lists that they give you are much more balanced than the N4 starter packs that they had.
Yeah, the N4 starter packs have more to do with creating link teams, which don't exist in this version of the game. So,
Mm-hmm.
and they have
And
more to do with
like,
putting in specific weapons to fill certain slots. But it's less about that in Code 1.
yeah, I feel like Corvus Belli really spent a lot of time on crafting these starter packs, like the Coldstrom stuff, to make it easy for people to sub in, like to buy those. Like if they're totally brand new, right? Get with a friend, split the box, and start playing. I think it's a great pack.
Yeah, having 2 armies in one box is always good because even if you buy it and you want to get a friend into it, you can paint both sides. You don't. You're not going out and trying to buy all sorts of stuff here and there to create 2 armies. So
Yeah,
it's a good
and
start.
and another thing that helps is that why would you get into it? Well, the models are freaking beautiful, right? That's basically what got us into the original Infinity the game, and it's just getting better with Code 1.
Yeah, it's a very tactical game. It doesn't have the Rochambeau feel of
Yeah.
basically kicking each other or basically going and punching each other in the face, alternating
Mm,
like a
yeah.
lot of other war games do, because it has
Huh.
every time you fight, it gives your opponent usually an option to fight back if they're watching you. So
Mm-hmm.
it feels like you're having a real firefight as opposed to just like subtracting from their force on your turn and they subtract from your force on your turn. It feels like you're
Yeah.
having a back and forth battle with one miniature on
Yeah.
one miniature.
Yeah. It feels like they're resisting as opposed to a lot of the other games where you just like you shoot, you unload your clips, and then if they're still alive, they unload their clip of guns, and then you're on to the next turn, right?
Yeah, it
So
feels like having the retarded boxing match of you just alternate punching each other in the face until one person falls over.
yeah, yeah. So obviously, we love this game. We've loved Infinity for a really long time. So why don't and this starter version is great. We've talked about how um, the actual packages that you can get to get in the game are really good. What about the specifics about this kind of well, with our experience of having played a few games, what are the really good selling points of Code One? Besides, what we just talked about with those kind of things, or
Yeah,
what sold you, and what did you really like about them?
I like the complexity of the full version of the game. So I don't know if I'm really the target audience of it,
Mm-hmm.
but I think some of the tweaks I can more talk about from the full version of the game to Code One, because the full version of the
Mm-hmm.
game has hacking, which gets to be quite
Mm-hmm.
complicated. And I would say
Yeah.
maybe it didn't need to be that. Now you have ways of sort of manipulating, basically giving out attacks as things are
Mm-hmm.
approaching you using hacking. Because
Yeah.
certain units have hacking that are much more. It's more versatile almost, even though there's fewer programs. So
Yeah.
you're not thinking about it as much. So it
So yeah.
actually
So yeah. So
so it feels like just having simpler and more universally applicable hacking programs.
yeah, I feel like what they did was that N3 was like we were talking about before, kind of like a sprawling, huge rule set where you can do whatever you want. Whereas Code One, it basically feels like they tried to cut away everything that they felt was not essential to the core of the game required to get the entire general feeling of the game, right? So they
Yes,
would
I think.
so in the originally they used to have, or in the N3, or and I assume in N4, they had like 4 different hacking devices, each with a ton of different programs. A lot of these programs were very, very marginal. Like if this very like I don't know 1% chance of happening a game thing happens, then you're going to use this program,
Yeah,
right?
once you have a couple hacking devices, you have about 2/3 of a sheet of paper with information on these hacking programs. So,
Mm-hmm.
and it sort of works the same way with there being more abilities throughout the rest of the game. That a lot of Infinity, you've got to think about very corner cases going on to get the win.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when it comes to
Yeah,
Code, all of those, like the multitude of things that are in there, are now not there. So it leaves you to concentrate more on the tactics, like your board
yeah,
positioning.
the main tactics and everything like that, and they left in enough of in my opinion at least, enough of the interesting things to like they still have hacking, right? But they basically limited it down to 2 programs that are useful and basically that make a hacker useful in all kind of situations, right?
Yep. So one of the programs is make it easier to target something and
Mm-hmm.
then target anything. And then the other programs are anything that's sort of robotic or has like power armor. It might
Yeah,
shut
super
that
tough.
down.
Yeah, they can stop them from acting. So with
Mm-hmm.
these 2 different kind of things, even though they didn't have all the different types of hacking programs they had before, those 2 mean that in most situations a hacker is a valuable tool and it does something unique and interesting, right? And I feel like that's kind of what they tried to do with all of the weapons and the different types of weapons and different types of units. They kind of pared it down to the quintessential, like iconic uh, abilities, units, or spells, hacking, that are required to get that feeling of the game. And I think if people have been listening to us, we have also kind of been like, this is kind of, I don't know, an important kind of thought in our evolution of gaming. Like in the game that we're working on, the entire idea is to pare a game down, a miniature game down to as little as possible, right? And I feel like Code One has done a lot of that. And in fact, one of my criticisms is that in some ways I feel like they could have gone farther, right?
Yeah, there's a few things that probably could have disappeared and the game still would have worked.
Yeah, exactly, right. And then so that when you're playing it, you still get all of the feelings of Code One of Infinity, without as much of the um, extra rules and the extra kind of like, it's crunchiness, right? And I'm not like totally against crunchiness, but I feel like a lot of the times you don't need the crunchiness, like the super complicated edge cases for just as much strategy. Like crunchiness doesn't necessarily add strategy or ability or whatever, right?
Nope.
It can often even distract from the game, because people are too busy just remembering rules as opposed to being in the moment, playing the game, and thinking about the overall arching like way that you play and strategy.
Yeah,
So
it does help to make things feel not repetitive. Like
mhm.
some, you might have the same situation in multiple games, but because of the sort of extra rules that are in there, now the game can take a lot of different directions. But for a game you don't play all that often, like you don't need all that those extra corner case rules.
Yeah, that's
And the
true. And again, this goes back into like Infinity as like an intro game to other people, right? If a new person, let's say they generally play Warhammer 40,000 or Frostgrave or I don't know, Flames of War, right? When you go and play Infinity, you don't necessarily need to switch things up all the time with small tweaks just to keep things interesting. You just need like a base set of rules to get that feeling of Infinity, right? Where that firefight, right? That heroic kind of pushing, going through in Ramboing, right? The ability to Rambo through the thing, and then the firefight of defending and all that kind of stuff. And that cinematic kind of feel. That's what makes Infinity so interesting and different from other games. And I feel like they've kind of captured that by reducing a lot of this extra stuff, right?
Yep.
And I feel like, especially if you're a new person, you're not going to miss all, like, because you've never even seen the stuff that's missing, you're not going to miss it,
No,
right?
the book is already full of rules, so it's
Oh
not
yeah,
like
that's the
it's
other thing. The book is not short. Like they
a
pared
lot
the
of
game down,
skills
but
and
even
abilities.
like, yeah, even pared down to what they did, that book is actually really in depth, right? And if you're playing Infinity like once a month, it's honestly more than enough to and more than enough stuff in that book to keep you basically occupied forever, right? If you only play it once a month.
Oh yeah, the games will all feel different, even if you play it for like 2 years once a month with the same
5 years or
faction.
whatever, maybe even,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, well, maybe not with the same faction, but they are releasing new factions. Well, they're planning to release, I think it's like 4 new factions a year until they have all the main factions, which is I think 10.
Yeah, so that is one of the big downsides I saw with Code One versus the full game. A lot of what people get that gets people into Infinity is the look of the models. And I
Yeah,
often tell people like if you like the look of the army, just go for it. As long as you don't hate the play style, which now that they've reduced the number of models you can take in each army, it's going to bring the play styles much closer together since like what you can't spam units anymore, which some of the armies that would have crappier but
uh,
higher model count, it's now
I
less
feel it's
enough.
almost the opposite.
Yeah. So
So
you think now there's less stuff in Code One
yeah,
that the factions are forced to be more different because not everybody doesn't have
yeah,
like 50 units each or more.
exactly, right. So I think one of the problems with Infinity is that it's been 15 years old, 10, 15 years old. So what has happened is that as they've added miniatures or units to each faction, the the
It's basically
the
filled in the
ability for a
gaps that
faction to do, they fill in all the gaps. And the thing that makes a faction unique and identifiable, well, number one is like the look, right? In my opinion.
yeah, no, same. I'm on the same page.
Yeah. So and then the second thing is they have to have both strengths and weaknesses. But if every faction has enough models to cover every strength and every weakness, they become more samey. Whereas in
Yeah.
Code One, because they've limited it to a much smaller subset of models, I think the ability to keep the weaknesses of every army and also have the strengths of that army be solely the domain of that army is going to be more likely.
Yeah. So do we want to talk about the strengths of each army at this point, like briefly? Because the current four factions are
Sure.
Eugene, Pano, O12, and it's called Combined, but really it's all Shazvasti models, which are space frogs.
Uh-huh.
So
Uh-huh.
I find the two most similar ones are probably the ones that come in Kaldstrom, which are the
Yeah.
orange Eugene and the blue Pano, because they're
Mm-hmm.
both like fairly tough armored factions with like
Mm-hmm.
pretty heavy firepower on their big guys. But how would you
Uh,
say you differentiate them? Because I would say they're the two
this is
closest
actually,
factions.
yeah. So this is one of those things that I actually found interesting in their choice of factions, because if you look at the overall factions in Infinity, they're quite different. But because they have so many factions, some of them are actually similar, right? And I do feel like the four factions they chose are actually some of like almost the most similar factions in the game.
Well, the combined slash Shazvasti, I would say, is fairly different than the other three.
No, I wouldn't say so.
No?
So not well, yes, compared to okay. So there's four factions we said, right? So Pano and Yujing are the most similar to each other. But if you were to compare Combined and Pano versus Combined and let's say Nomads or Hack or Ariadna, I think
Yeah.
Combined plays, even though they look different, they actually play more similarly to Pano and Yujing than they do to Nomads or Hack or Ariadna.
Yeah, so maybe they were afraid that the other factions wouldn't work as well because they're more based around higher model counts, and maybe they wanted to wait
Yeah,
to release some new models and
yeah,
then use
or
those as the
maybe
basis.
maybe that's literally part of the reason why they did do it is that these four factions, they're like for us, we come from the Infinity, like the old Infinity game. So these we are like we kind of have accepted the huge differences in those factions, but maybe to them as an introductory product it makes sense to choose four factions that are not like super different but different enough, and especially like in terms of different enough to that you can basically anyone can get into every faction and it's not too complicated. You're not trying to like learn an entirely different faction if one person chooses Hack and one person chooses uh, uh, let's say Pano. The way those two guys are going to play is going to be really different. Whereas, right, so then the ability for, let's say, your friend who's getting into the game to help you with tactics or kind of understand what you're doing is going to be much harder, right? Then if and even to play against a Pano player versus a Hack player is going to be much different than if you have four factions that are a little bit more similar, so that when you play against another faction, it's not going to be like, oh my God, I played like against Pano 3 times. Now I'm playing against Combined. I don't know, like, or now I'm playing against Ariana. I don't know how to fight them. Whereas if I played 3 times against Pano and now I'm playing against Combined, it's a little bit less harsh to deal with the things that they're throwing at you.
Yeah, your knowledge spans across all
Applicable.
the armies a bit more. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, let's talk about the actual armies.
Okay, so Eugene and Pan O both bring pretty good, like heavy models with a fair bit of armor, so they can take a lot of
Yeah.
shots. But I would say that a big defining feature of Code One that I found different from Infinity, which I think is one way the armies differentiate, is
Mm-hmm.
that you want more because there's less defensive abilities with there being fewer rules on the board. Like a lot of rules
Mm-hmm.
in the full version of Infinity give you defensive tech, whereas
Mm-hmm.
when those don't exist in Code One, you now have to rely on some different things to defend yourself, and it means
Mm-hmm.
that attack pieces that are say really fast or are just really survivable, they have lots of wounds, they can take lots of hits, so they can get across the
Mm-hmm.
board and kill a few things before they're taken down
Uh-huh.
in response. That those become more important. So those are more of a, I would say they're more of a defining feature of the armies because you're going to need those, you're going to want those pieces.
Okay, so you're talking about in general the armies, how they play.
Yes, and I think a lot of how they play is
Yeah.
based around their major offensive pieces.
Um, I think that's always been though. Like, I guess it's not exactly always been. It's when you play 10-man lists, you're right. When because of the gameplay, right? Because everyone plays a 10-man list. You play in the 10-man list style, which means that you're going to your attack pieces and your defending pieces. They have to be like robust in and of themselves. And so that is an important thing. That's in general one of the fun things about Infinity is that you have we talked about this before, Rambo pieces, right? And the ability for Rambo guy to kind of like push into your enemy is great, right?
Yeah, whether it means maybe they have speed, so you don't have to spend so many activations getting up there,
or they start up the board because they're infiltrating, right? That's a big deal to have that when you only have 10 orders, right? To go and move in. And so, yes. But in terms of the actual armies, I think all of the armies have decent, like you would say, attack pieces, right? And this is kind of the thing where you could say, because all of these army lists were chosen to be able to play in Code 1 well, I think that's part of the reason why they're like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so all the factions have like high armor attack pieces, pretty much. I don't know if I think
so. So how would you define them? I guess we're trying to talk about the factions. How would you differentiate? We talked about how the 4 factions they used are a little bit more samey, but what makes Pano different than Eugene, different from O12, different from Combined? And let's throw in a little bit of the fluff and the look, basically, because like we said, that's what we find really interesting and important.
Yeah, so I guess going back to the 2 most similar ones, Pano and Eugene. They both, aside from having different colors, they both have like the heavily armored look to a lot of their units. And they have winter jackets on because of Operation Coldstrom.
Yeah, and look great. I love it. Apparently winter jackets are great fashion.
Yeah. So they have that similar look going on. And they're both human as well, which, because Shazvasti are frogmen, they do look different from that. And they both have fairly, well, with all the human factions, which are O12, Pano and Eugene, have fairly similar looking robot options.
Okay.
I don't see them as hugely different.
Okay.
So that's all similar between them, but then the combined robots look quite a bit different.
All right. You want me to talk about these differences? Or you talk about combined?
Because that's the only one I own, so I don't.
Okay. Okay. So let's just generally go through the 4 different factions. Okay. Pano. The idea of Pano is that they're like basically the superpower of in the future, right? Earth is basically has gone into the stars as a fledgling civilization, and in Infinity, you're talking about the human sphere, which is revolving around humans, right? And so the biggest nation, the biggest nation, it's basically the capitalist, I think they call it the hyperpower, to differentiate from superpowers of modern day. So the idea is that it's kind of like the West, basically, but they're actually not the West in the fluff. But they're basically like supposed to be the capitalist superpower of the future. And then Eugene is the Asian superpower, basically based off of China, right? They took all of the stereotypes of China and smashed them all together, and they're also the second runner-up in the future versus the capitalist superpower. And then we have O12, which is supposed to be the UN, but in the future, the UN is, I guess...
they're combined with Google. They have the AI that runs everything.
Yeah, and they have been given military power. So they're not just about having nations come together and talk about it. They threaten other nations with their military might as well. So so that's kind of like, imagine the UN had a large military arm, right? And control over the AI that runs society. And then the final one is Combined, which is this alien invading faction, and the Combined in Code 1 is specified around the Frogmen, the Shasvasti, which is one of the races that the Combined is using to invade the human sphere. And so that's the general kind of theme. Now, in terms of gameplay, in terms of miniatures, I feel like Pano and Eugene are, like you said, they're similar in that their emphasis is on heavy infantry, right? They kind of have tough guys who can go out there and fight. And obviously their themes are different because one is basically Asian themed, Asian stereotype themed, and then the other is
your European night themed.
Yeah, it's supposed to be about Southeast Asia and everything like that, but the amount of Southeast Asian themes and Indian themes. So yeah, it's supposed to be the future capitalist nations of Brazil, Southeast Asia, and India form the core, and then Europe joins later. But because the company Corvus Belli is European, even though that's the theme, they have no real, like, the look of them is European, has the European aesthetic.
Yeah, it's a European knight aesthetic.
Yeah, exactly. So there's knights, and then there's the general kind of European Western kind of theme. So you don't really see much Indian or Southeast Asian looking things, even though fluff-wise it's supposed to be the major block. So yeah. So besides the look, though, what kind of differentiates gameplay between Pano and Eugene, even though they're about, big guys with high tech, high tech heavy infantry kind of thing, is that Pano is, I guess everyone is more, specialized at killing, right? So each guy that you take has more like one kind of thing that they do that's really good, whereas the Eugene guys are generally, even though they're both like heavy infantry, the Eugene guy will be more versatile. So
probably have a few more weapons on him.
Yeah, exactly, to handle a few more options or situations. Whereas the Pano guy will be more straight about shooting a guy dead or doing one specific kind of thing. And that's kind of how they differentiate them.
And I guess Eugene might have a little better close combat ability, but the game's not based around close combat.
I think it actually has significantly better close combat ability. But like you said, it's, yeah.
The focus of the game's not around close combat. It's a futuristic shooting war. So
yeah, that's a minor kind of theme, right? Mm-hmm. And then the other guys, O12, what do you consider O12?
I haven't looked at them in enough detail. Like, I will build an army for them, but I haven't considered what they're as good at. They've got more ability to sort of stop your opponent versus killing them. They've got more maybe passive weapons that get them stuck in place, and maybe a little better hacking ability to slow your opponent down without necessarily killing them before you try and get them into a trap with certain tech, and then you finish them off.
Okay, so yeah, like O12, I think also actually has a decent amount of tough infantry and things like that. I think visually they're modeled after like police, like sci-fi police force.
Yeah, they've got a few Judge Dredd models going on. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and yeah, so I guess their theme is more like stopping people and then finishing them off, as opposed to Pano, which is shooting you dead, specializing in that, or Eugene as being versatile and like being able to do all like a little bit of everything, right? So, yes. So you'd say, I guess O12 has more of a disruption kind of feel.
Yeah, none of us have put it on the table yet amongst our group of friends. So I
wouldn't. For Code 1.
Yes. So I would say that's what it looks like on paper, but we'll have to see how it plays.
Yeah. All right, and now Combined. Tell us about Combined, how they look like, what's good about them. and how to differentiate?
So honestly, because most of it is that Frog Shazvasti men look, which I mean, it's a pretty good look, but so many of the models have the same look to them that they don't feel like they have the same variability of like really big guys and then like smaller, just regular infantry linemen. They have more of a similar look throughout the whole army.
Okay.
So, I mean, if you like the look,
I think
of
part
that,
of what helps them what part of the reason for that is that at least the models that bring into Code One, they're not the Shasvasti in general are not heavily armored. In fact, they're high. They're still expensive and good at fighting, but it's not about what you'd say like tanking hits and like just winning by attrition. It's more about being really good at sneaking around and like shooting the guy when he's not ready.
yeah, so in the game, there's camouflage, which puts your models in a state where you can't shoot at them directly unless they reveal themselves, or you manage to like spot them that they're really that marker is really an enemy. So they have lots of options for putting those troops in that camouflage state on the board, and they have lots of. I guess you differentiated Pano from Eugene, saying that Pano has like each troop has their one main weapon they focus on using. And the Shazvasti, though, the combined tend to have quite a few weapons on them for their good, expensive troops. So rather than just being good at one thing, they're often harder to hit in a shootout for their good pieces, and they'll have a few weapons on them. And some of them also just straight up regenerate after you shot them. If they fall down, they may get back up again.
They're a little bit less tanky, but they're a little bit more, but they're still survivable in their own way.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not about like, I guess you wouldn't say you ram at like you run into them head first and overpower them, or you like just stay there and just so let's say the Pano or Eugene style would be, you shoot them directly, head face first, shoot them, right? Pano would be like literally, I have this one gun, I'm going to use it. Eugene is a little bit more like, oh, well, whoever I'm fighting, I'm going to use the appropriate weapon, right? But they're still saying, I'm going to hit you in the face, mano a mano, and when you attack me back, I'm going to tank it mano a mano. Right?
Yeah. Whereas when you attack combined, you're not sure necessarily what you're attacking all the time. So
because of all the camo, and then their ability to move around and hide and sneak around people seems quite good. And actually, if you get hit in the face with a Shasvasti guy, right, with the right weapon, he's much more likely to crumple. Like they have good defenses, but if they get hit in their weak point, they kind of fall much faster than a Pano or Eugene or O12 army.
Yeah. If you break through their defenses, they have problems.
Yeah. All right. That's generally the kind of theme of that. Have anything else about the specific factions they chose, or?
So Pano is sort of one of the main looks of the game. So the game has the sort of power armor look to a lot of the heavy stuff. So those factions really show it off. So having Pano or Eugene in there really does show off like the look of a lot of the cool heavy stuff in Infinity. So I think that was one of the main choices. Maybe they didn't have to put both in.
That's a good point. So you think that the reason why they chose like Pano, Eugene, and O12 is because of all of the heavy armor? It has almost a direct comparison to like Space Marines.
Yeah, but with much more detail and much more realistic.
In my opinion, yeah. Well, yeah, variety in aesthetic and design. Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe it would appeal to people who have like only been exposed to that before.
That's a good point. I actually didn't really think about that.
And putting an O12 in the other, I think they were just due for being released. Honestly, they just needed like one was about to come out and the other needed to be redone, so they were on the list, so they made it in there.
Okay. So like you
And
feel
maybe
like
that
Pano.
the
Yeah.
aliens are just different than the other ones. So
Yeah. So the aliens make sense, right? You have aliens and then the quintessential human factions, which
yeah, so
are
fighting in space.
directly comparable to Space Marines, which is the primary miniatures that people look at. So they're like, oh yeah, these are cool, basically alternative looking kind of uh, space heavy infantry. So that kind of drags people in. And
Spacemen
then
with swords. Yeah.
yeah, and then O12 is literally, oh yeah, and what's our next faction? Oh, we have these guys are next. We might as well shove those guys in. You know what? That probably has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, that's my guess. Anyhow,
Okay, so
but like we said, it does play
overall, yeah,
differently. So it's
yeah. So overall, I do want to go a little bit more into what makes Infinity Code 1 so good for a starting person. So we said everything is more pared down, and we kind of compare it um, more about comparing it to the old game. But in the context of someone new and starting, I want to talk a little bit more about the choices they've made in terms of paring things down and why I really, really like a lot of the choices they made. So I do want to go over like the 10-man choice of saying that, you can choose 10 men.
yeah. So when you're playing the full game, you're thinking up between like 10 and like 18 models on the board,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not sure how big you should go when you swap things out. It makes like you're not sure if you should go for one less model or you should like replace things.
Mm-hmm.
So building the list is actually quite complicated in the full version of the game to get that balance between having like the number of models you want on the board to get things done. But you now
Yep.
stop thinking about that when you're just like, it's going to be 10.
Yeah. And uh, yeah, definitely the ability to create a list of 10 men, right? And the fact that it's always 10 is really helpful. I also feel like 10 guys is, it's the number of fingers you have. So it's just a nice number. And it's also something that is not super intimidating for a person to paint up, right? Like 10 models when you're good just getting in, like even if, like, obviously, if you are, well, there are two groups of people that are coming in, right? 10 guys would be, let's say you're trying to get someone who plays board games usually. 10 guys is a fairly like low number to say, oh, you just gotta, assemble and paint 10 guys. It's not super strenuous, right? To get people into. And then the other thing is if you're coming in from a game like, I don't know, even War Machine or 40K, 10 men is like one squad.
It feels like
So
nothing. It doesn't feel like a huge undertaking to get them on the
yeah,
board.
and because of the way Infinity is played, it's supposed to be like two covert ops teams fighting, right? It's not about all out war, which is like 40K or even historical games. Um, that each of your units and 10 guys does not look the same, right? So it's like when you think about it, I don't know, if you're like a 40K player and you're thinking, oh, maybe I should try out this Infinity thing. All you have to do is paint one squad of guys, right? 10 guys. And the other thing is like, because every single character that you choose can be different, especially in Code 1, because there's no link teams. What that means is that it's, how in like when you're normally painting like giant squads, you're like, oh, I'm going to reward myself by painting this character after I slogged through 10 of the same guy. Yeah. Every single character you paint in Infinity, and especially Code 1, because you only have 10 people, it's going to be a character, right?
Yeah, there's
so
only
you're only getting the good feelings of painting something new and different.
Yeah, there's only 3 models that repeat, and they're all different sculpts too. So
yeah. So to me, that's like a really really good kind of size. Once you get over 10, you start having to use your toes, and that becomes harder for people to count. So I really like that number.
Yeah, most people don't batch paint in numbers much larger than that if they aren't kind of like into spending. Yeah. If they want to feel like a sense of accomplishment once in a while. Because when you do more than that, it takes forever to
oh my god, it's so painful. When I painted like 30 orcs, I decided I would never do that again.
Mhm.
Honestly, I was painting my Rising Sun miniatures for the Rising Sun board game, and they had 10 units that are roughly the same, right? It's actually not true. There's like 4 models basically, but you have to paint like duplicates, two of each,
Okay.
and that felt like a slog. I was
Uh-huh.
like,
So you
oh my
guys
god. To be fair, I had to paint 5 of them
paint 5
because there's 5
factions. They all have.
factions. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh my God, this is so painful. So the fact that, Infinity, you just paint 10-man squad, or maybe 2 if you're painting your friends' army so that you can start playing, it's a lot easier on your, just to get there and paint. And of course, as we all know, you should paint your minis.
Oh yeah, of
Don't play
course.
it. Yeah, don't pay it metal. All right. So the other thing is we did talk about this briefly, but I do want to come back and talk about why the smaller size of the board is good. So we already said it's a 32 by 48, right? And that
So
allows
there's
you to have a lot less terrain. We already
so
said
there are
that.
So I guess going back one step, there's 3-point levels that
Mm-hmm.
they suggest for code 1. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's 15, 25, and 30.
Yep.
And the board size changes depending on how many, like what point level you're playing at, which is
Yeah.
sort of based around the poster size that comes with the starter set.
Yeah, because basically the starter set comes with a poster where one side is a poster and the other side is the floor for terrain, like for a mat.
Yeah. Mhm.
So that instead of playing on, let's say, just an entirely green velvet thing, you're playing on a mat that looks like futuristic terrain, like a futuristic landscape. I think it's roadways or something like that.
Yep. So the 15 is basically like what you get in the starter box
Mm-hmm.
without sort of adding custom stuff. And it's more
Yeah.
of I would describe it as more of an introductory point level.
Mm-hmm.
But because every model you take gives you another activation to make, everything
Mm-hmm.
that's left like alive on your board side gives you an activation to make. That in order to move your guys around bigger tables, you need to have more models to get more activations every turn. So when
Yeah.
you've only got, say, the 6 models you start with, you can only make 6 activations a turn, which limits how far you can get across the board, because you could spend all 6 activations on one guy,
Mm-hmm.
but the
And that's why you can
limited
Rambo. Yeah.
yes, limited number of orders means if the board gets too big, you may never encounter each other. So the point sizes are tailored that you can actually get to your opponent. And we've been playing
And interact. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, so the middle point level of 25, because every level maxes out at 10 models.
Uh-huh.
That we've been playing at the 25-point level. And I think from other people I've heard talk about the game, they prefer the 25-point level as well. Just
Mm-hmm.
because when you start going to the 30-point level, you now
Mm-hmm.
still only have 10 orders, but now the board has become, rather than 32 inches wide by 48 long, it's now 48 by 48.
Yeah.
And with that 10 orders, it becomes difficult to traverse the whole 48-inch wide board. And some troops may never
Mm-hmm.
do anything in the course of the game. Well, frequently
Yeah, because they just don't have the orders and you don't have the ability to get to them.
yeah, they're just so far out of place. But at the 25-point level, with the board only being 32 inches wide, you can sort of bring any models into action if you really want to. They may not be the closest unit, but if you really want to bring it into the battle, you can. So I've found that 30, the smaller board size at 25 is just much better. Also, at the bigger point level, you're forced, because now you're still trying to fill those 10 slots, but you've got more points to use. You're now pushed towards you're forced to use more of the heavier units.
Mm-hmm.
So there's now less ability for you to vary what goes into your force.
So in some ways, even though you have you think you have more options because you have 30 points instead of 25 points of troops, you still only can have 10 people. So that actually ends up limiting the number of choices to make an effective army, because you need 5 more points, but you still need the same number of guys, which means it's less likely for you to use the cheaper guys and more likely to use the more expensive guys.
Yep.
Yeah. So it does feel like, and this is one thing that I think is great, is like they're kind of pushing you towards the 25-point list, right? Although it did sound like they're maybe that's just right now, but it sounds like they're kind of encouraging you to play the 25-point level. And I'd say that is like the level that you want to play Code 1. Like we said, 10 men, you can relatively easily get to 10 units in 25 points, and you have to take a variety of guys. And because of the size of the board, the action like happens. There will be a lot of action in the game. And then the other thing is that with only having it, so in the 25-point level, we said you had a 32-inch by 48 board. That is 2 starter terrain packs. So if you are not into building your terrain, right, or let's say you're not ready because you're spending all your time painting up your models, you can buy the terrain pack separately, right? And it is cardboard terrain, but it's pretty sturdy, right? And you just take 2 packs and you have most of your terrain, and then you just need to, like we said, add a little bit more scatter terrain, maybe buy a building or something like that, right? Or make 1 building, right, or so. And that is a really big, great selling point for people just getting into the game. And then the other thing is, like for us, just playing a game quickly, setting up 32 inches of 32 by 48 inches of terrain is a lot easier than 48 by 48. It's just a lot quicker to set up the table and get into playing.
Yeah, and now this isn't the problem we have because we've played war games for so long. So we have the boards to put down to make 4-foot by 4-foot boards. But if you've got more of a standard size kitchen table, that 32 inches now means you could play across the width of it. If you've got sort of
that's true. Yeah, I can't believe I didn't even talk about that.
No, I haven't thought about this before, but now just realizing for starter players and like the bare minimum you need, now you don't need to go to the hardware store and start buying like 4-foot wide plywood.
Yeah, making your own 4-foot by 4-foot extension on your table, because most kitchen tables are 33 by 48 or more, right?
The length usually varies more than the width because there's sort of an ideal width
that's right.
across from someone.
That's right. But 32 by 48 is relatively easy to find. Actually, my kitchen table is 32 by 48. I think it's 33 actually by 48, but that's like, actually more than that. It's 33 by 50, I think. And so the ability to actually just play Infinity on my table without having to go out and get my extensions, which of course I have because we've been playing for so long. Yeah. But being able to do that is so much easier for people to play. And I think I even mention this all the time about like the newer starter games and even like our game, right? Our game is 24 by 32, which can even fit on like your table
now.
Yeah. But like 32 by 48 to get a game like Infinity that's so crunchy and everything like that is definitely a huge selling point, especially if you don't have like a house where you have like a special room to play your miniature games. If you just got to do that, that's like that in and of itself makes it such a good. Just that change is like so underappreciated to keep your to actually play the game, right? Even if you love the game, just the barrier of saying, oh man, I gotta set up this 48 by 48 board, or I could go and sit down and play my video games, right? That could be the difference, right? That thing that tips it over. But when you're like, oh no, we can just clear off my kitchen table, we can play there. Like that makes it so much easier to get there, going and playing.
Yep. Actually, honestly, I feel like boards.
Sorry?
Honestly, I actually don't own the 4-foot boards. I could go have them by the I could have them by the afternoon, but I don't.
Oh, do we generally play on my place then? Have we played on my place generally for like? Because we've been playing on 4-foot by 4-foot for a long time, like over 10 years. Really?
Yeah, we just
whenever we go to your place, we don't play. I guess it's true.
No, we just hobby.
Oh yeah.
And
now I know why, because you didn't bother to get the 4-foot by 4-foot boards.
I have the terrain, I just don't have the boards.
Yeah.
Anyways.
All right. Yeah. Okay. All right. What else we got here?
So do we want to talk? tactics for
Yep.
new players, or do we not want to go that far?
I want to go talk about more. The last thing that we kind of touched on initially that I want to go into a little bit more is the complication. Both good and bad, to dive a little bit deeper of the game.
So with the full version of Infinity, I found that for new players to learn the game, the barrier to actually just go read through the rulebook and learn the game was almost insurmountable for most people. That the best way for them to learn was just to have it shown to them by someone else. To go, okay, here's what happens when you activate a guy. You have two things you do during the turn. Do you want to, like, you just introduce it first? Do you want to move first, or do you want to shoot then move? And basically most of the time you move then shoot, just because of how the response system moves. So, okay, say move your guy where he wants to go, and then your opponent then says what they want to do, then you say what you want to do with your second half. Like, you just explain that to people, which is far easier than reading through all the rules, sort of get that explanation. And then from that point, you just you add stuff.
You can curate. You can curate the options, right, that you can do for those actions.
Yeah, you tell them, don't worry about all this other stuff. Just start off by doing these few things and using these couple guys, and then just like tell them what to look up, because they'll have the list, or you want to print it usually and give it to them if you're helping them learn, or they've got it on their phone often, so you can tell them where to go to look for information. So like, okay, do you know what weapons this guy has? And if he doesn't know, you're like, oh, go look it up, or you just tell him you've got this one, and then let them know to go look their weapon chart to get all the info, and just sort of they can fight just starting that way. And then you're like, okay, in this situation, you actually have this you could do with this guy because he's got this ability. You just sort of keep adding things. Whereas if you were to have to try and learn all the abilities at once, a new player doesn't know what the priority is for learning rules. So it's often more difficult. But I guess with Code 1, though, they do sort of have some introductory missions. We haven't played them because we don't need them, but that layer up the number of rules that are going on.
Yeah. And they did do the kind of, I don't know what you call it, Fantasy Flight kind of way of introducing the game, where they basically, the very beginning of the book is I think it's 15 pages. It's actually still a lot. Like we said, the game is not, it's still complicated, but it's 15 pages just to run you through a game, right? Where they're like, okay, take these models and go and do this, and then run through how the game works. So it's kind of trying to do that demo, like you're talking about, for a person who's trying to read it. I know some people are a little bit more not quite as happy with, like, maybe they think that they could have done a better description, but at least that kind of thing I think does help a new player.
Yeah, because that's how you would do it in person if you were teaching someone, and they're kind of trying to replicate that in-person thing, which is, it's, in my opinion, the best way of doing it.
And the fact that they have a lot, like we said, they've pared down a lot of the extra things that you just have to remember, like trying to keep it to a core thing, I think has been, or is very helpful if you're just trying to get in, or just, like I said, if you just don't have to remember stuff. The cognitive load is a lot lower. And I do know there's been...
The cognitive load in N3 was so high that there was no one book to read to even learn the game. It didn't exist. You couldn't even go do it. So that's why
you almost have to learn from the wiki. They're like, oh, this situation came up. Can I look through the wiki? And then you follow 3 links down, and then you kind of figure out how to do it. And I do feel like one of the things that I noticed, like Infinity, like we said, it's even Code 1, which is a simpler version, is still very complicated. And if you're the type of person that finds that Code 1 is too complicated, basically, I think some of our friends mentioned this, that even though Code Infinity is a great game, it's not for everyone, right? The way you play is different than a lot of games, and of course, like, just the fact that it's skirmish and all these kind of things, the way the reaction kind of way you play, and the complication is not for everyone. But I feel like Code 1 is for more people, because they tried to remove, if you have a barrier of things being too deep and too complicated, where you could say that it doesn't matter a lot for the overall strategy, those people like that, it's more likely to, I guess, snag them, or sorry, not snag, to be acceptable for those people. So they don't have that barrier.
Yeah, and I guess if you don't have a group to join who can teach you the game, Code 1 you could digest on your own if you had to.
Yeah, I think so. It's because it's like the base rules and there's not as many like extra rules. So when you play a code one of the good things I think with code one is because it's they cut out all these other things. When you're playing against someone who is, let's say, a veteran, they're much less likely to gotcha because they know a rule that you didn't know.
Yeah, there's just fewer rules to know, so that's
Exactly. So when they beat you, it'll be because they played a lot and they know the tactics of the core thing. So it feels more accepting for a person because it feels like, oh, I know most of the rules. I'm not getting gotcha because I didn't remember that you can throw a grenade or whatever. This kind of last template is actually this type of thing as opposed to this. Like I remembered all these things. I just didn't know the implications of how they play out on the battlefield, right? As opposed to with Infinity, you have to remember a lot of things before you get to that level, right?
yeah.
And honestly, if you don't play it enough, you just can't remember it because there's so much.
No, you can't even remember all the different types of troops in their army.
In your own army.
You can't even like think
Yeah.
about how to build your own army.
Yeah. So I think that really helps, even though the game is still very complicated. And so, what do you think about? I think you mentioned there's a lot less defensive tech in Code One.
Yeah, I wanted to get back to that. A big thing that most players like the big part of I would say it's the first thing that new players have to learn is how to keep their model safe.
Uh-huh.
Because often you'll think, oh, I want to be watching everywhere so they don't sneak up on me. But the easier, more accessible you make your models to shoot, the easier it is for your opponent to kill them.
Yes.
Because getting across the board actually takes a lot of activations. So
Uh-huh.
just by the mere fact of you hiding your guy, you're now eating up their turn by
Yeah.
forcing them to come towards you. But the thing is,
Yeah.
once they get close to you and you haven't stopped them, they can now start picking off your guys. So you've got to be very careful about how you decide to set up your defenses in the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it also honestly feels, because of that, it almost feels more like the kind of gunfights you see in TV and movies. And I don't know, I don't know nothing about real gunfights, so I don't know if this is actually how it happens. I'm just judging by the movies I watch, where people are like, they shoot and they hide, right? They're not sitting out there just looking. And when they do, they get, right? Defensively, when they're just sitting out there with their head up, in a movie, they get their head shot off, right?
Yeah.
So it just feels more like the actual like movie cinematic kind of feel, right? And so
Yeah,
it
and the
feels
people
more
who do
real than, yeah.
And if something is sitting out there, it's like a tank sitting out there. You're like, oh man, it's a tank. I can't just pick off a
Yeah.
tank in one shot.
Mm-hmm. And
So
they might sit out there to try and slow you down, which, yeah. But there are two rules that I do think that I kind of miss. So, like you said, there's a lot more tankiness in the game, but uh, it kind of means because they're missing some defensive tech. It kind of does feel like the attack is a lot stronger than it is in the main game. And so one of those things that I would like uh, is if they added some of the general defensive kind of tech that they had in the main game. And the two that I'm thinking about are one, Suppressive Fire, and two, the Guts roll check. So, and I have a little bit of different reasons why I like the two. In terms of, let me explain kind of what they do. So, Suppressive Fire is the ability for someone to, even if they don't see anyone, just to like, with the right weapon, the
you
idea
get
is
three
that
shots. You get 3 shots back instead of 1 shot back
yeah,
if you put them
yeah,
into that state.
yeah. So normally, when you're defending, right? So when someone shoots you, uh, in defense, you can shoot 1 shot back, right? And then to their normal 3 shots, right? But then if you're in suppressive fire, you have a more limited range, but you can shoot 3 shots instead of 1 shot, and that's great for defensively, like protecting yourself. And I feel like if you do anything from that point, it becomes you break your suppressive fire, right? And I feel like that kind of models more about what you see again in movies, right? Like if the enemy is just trying to strike straight at you, the then you just start firing a lot to kind of lay a hail of fire, suppressive fire, so they can't just run at you, right? So I really liked that in the game, and it gave, I feel like, the defending player a little bit more defense. So it felt more like they're like, you can set up strong defense at any one point, as opposed to just if you need to.
It felt like more you were having a real gunfight back and forth because you prepped for the gunfight rather than just being like, oh, maybe someone's going to come at me. You're like, no, someone's definitely coming at this guy, and you're ready to fire back.
Lay that fire down. Yeah, so I really liked that portion, and I understand why they removed it because of the complication, right? Again, it's an extra rule, but I feel like in terms of at least the base rules of the game, it is a really good thing to rule that adds more than it's worth the complication it adds because of the dynamic nature it creates on the tabletop to have that amount of defense if you set it up correctly, right?
Yep.
Of course, to make it work, you have to have enough terrain so that people can not, like, if you are suppressive firing, that they have an ability to walk around you or avoid the suppressive fire and still attack you, right?
Yeah, if they want to spend a lot of activations to run around behind that guy, if you've got enough terrain, now the game can let
or avoid them, right? So that you need enough terrain for that rule to work. But to me, that's really kind of what sells the game overall, right? And then the other thing is guts rolls. So this kind of has an interesting effect because, like, if you get hit in the game in Code 1, you just stand there, right? And you take the shot.
Or you either stay there or you die.
Yeah. And so in the original game, you could, if you got hit, you could duck back into cover, like move 2 inches. And sometimes if you fail your guts roll, like, you can either voluntarily duck back in, or if you want to stay out.
Yeah, or if you're up on a roof and there's sort of like a short wall in front of you.
Yeah, and you thought your enemy was lucky. Sorry? Yep.
Yeah, also if you're like behind some short piece of cover, you can hit the ground and then sort of hide behind it. So that's the other way of getting out of the way. Yeah,
and to me it felt very, again, more cinematic, right? More like how you think about it in movies. When some guy gets hit, they think they're going to die because, let's say, they were expecting I don't know, a guy with a pistol and then a guy with a heavy machine gun showed up, then they get hit once. You would think that in a movie the guy would be like, oh my God, and duck into cover. But in Code 1, they do stay out there, right? Which is a rule that I feel like, again, this is just cinematic. But again, it does add more complication, right? The idea that you can duck beneath, or sometimes you have to duck beneath if you want to stay out there. But the unit fails their willpower roll, they need to duck in. So I felt like that was a great portion of the game, and removing that does, it reduces complexity, and yes, you have the basics of the game through, but I felt like that portion was worth it.
Yeah, it loses some realism, and it really weakens the defensive ability, because now the thematic part about, like, oh, you take a hit and you're like, oh, I don't want this fight anymore, you hide. And the defensive portion of just the gameplay, that if you've got, say, a multi-wound model out there and you don't like the fight, you can take one hit, go down, and wait till it's your turn to respond at full power.
Yeah.
So not just having to stay there till you get killed.
And I feel like, I know kind of the reason why, again, they did it is just complication, right? Now the rules for if you get hit, so basically when you get hit in the old game, you'd have to make a roll, and if you succeeded on the roll, you can choose, if you succeeded on the roll, to duck into cover or stay out there, right? So let's say you're a guy in Suppressive Fire and a pistol guy shows up and they get lucky and they hit you and you survive, you actually still want to stay out there, right? Keep on fire at them, right? So, but if it's an HMG, you want to duck in. Now, if you succeed on the roll, you can choose to stay out there or duck in. But if you fail, you have to duck in. And the issue with that, the rules, that is, to me, the complicated part that made them remove it. Because the rules in Infinity are, if you fail your roll, you are forced to duck in, but there's specific steps about how you have to, like, how you move to duck in, which is the complicated part.
And there's abilities on different models that change how that whole sequence works and what your choices are.
Yes. Although
So that
technically
makes
they could have just not chosen models with those rules, or even not given those models rules. And
yeah.
I do feel like if because they're using the rules in the main game, they didn't change it, right? Although I think they could, but in my opinion, they could have changed it to make it easier, right? While still retaining the basic rules, right? So the way I would think about it is if you succeed, you can choose, right? To duck it, you get a free 2-inch move, but you have to have more cover, right? You can't have less cover. You can just choose
Yeah.
if you succeed. Then if you fail, your opponent gets to choose where you move, right? Your opponent can move you 2 inches as long as you have the same cover or more. And to me, that's basically how you would do it, right? And I think that basically kind of gives the theme of what's happening without keeping it super complicated.
Yeah, it does slow down the game a bit because then during every firefight, you've got to make one additional roll afterwards. So maybe the speed was worth the payoff. Who knows?
I would say I like that portion. And then,
Oh, I know. Like I
but you're
said,
right. It does slow it down. It does make it slower, like you said. It's an extra roll every basically firefight.
Yeah, but the question is is there too much reduction in defensive ability because of these two things being gone?
Yeah, I
Well,
would
there's actually more
say
things. There's fire teams where a whole bunch of guys combine to gain superpowers,
Mhm.
which maybe that will go away in the future during a revision
Yeah,
to the rule.
that's just
Hopefully
a
it's not.
terrible portion. That's one of the best things about Code One that they don't put that in. In my opinion, it's just like this old crufty rule from like second edition, and they're on
Yeah.
fourth edition, and they're still using the same rules, and it doesn't match any of the changes that they've done for the rest of the game.
Yeah. So they've indicated that they're going to change it, but that's another like, huge defensive tech that's also removed in Code One. So
Yeah,
defense is vastly reduced compared to the
yeah.
typical normal game.
Again, though, link teams also give a huge offensive boost as well. So it's questionable on whether that whether that is a defensive or offensive, like whether that's a good thing in terms of strengthening defense or not.
Yeah.
But to make the defense good, they have added a couple of other rules that I feel like we're talking about complication, right? You want to reduce the complication for the game. I do feel like instead of removing those two things, which technically I feel, to me at least, I feel like they're core to make the game work the way it should, right? In terms of the gameplay, in terms of having the defensive and offensive strategies and being able to keep the enemy back, I feel like those two things are important.
Yeah, because a lot of the game is about moving up and controlling territory. But if your ability to defend yourself is really weak, now you don't like trying to control territory is too difficult. So you just more want to kill things and eliminate them. So now the territory is yours rather than like staying and trying to hold it.
Mm-hmm. And so it does, in some ways, it changes the game to be more like cat and mouse, which, to be fair, it's a fine game, right? In fact, it's more similar, honestly, to more other miniature games, right?
Yeah.
In the way that other miniature games play skirmish games, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in some ways, maybe it is fine. It's just different.
Yeah, because in many games, like other miniature games, you can break your opponent's army on their turn. They attack you, and your army was set up so well in defense that you win the firefights. Their guys are all killed, and they lost on their turn. Your opponent loses on their own turn, which makes the game very different than other games.
Oh, yeah. And it also can feels bad. So it can make... so maybe that's partially why that they kind of reduced it. But the other thing, they did put in other defensive tech that I felt was not needed, like total reaction bots, which are one of these very, very strong defensive techs in the game that basically... It's exactly the thing like Suppressive Fire, except even some ways more powerful, because so basically allows you to fire full burst, right? All of your dice on defense, right? Usually you can only roll one die instead of the normal 3 or 4, but Total Reaction allows you to fire your full burst, and the Total Reaction bot has a 4 burst weapon, which is very, very strong.
And it sees in all directions, unlike most guys who only see it out their front.
So you can't even sneak behind it to kill it, which you can definitely do for most guys. So this is like they added in a unit that has some of the strongest defensive tech in the game, but removed the ability for most units, their normal defensive tech, right, which is Suppressive Fire and dodging in, right, which is a little bit odd in my opinion. And I feel like part of the reason they did that is because they just wanted to sell the remotes, right? They're like, I do feel like this is one of those things where sales dictated the rules they put into their game, which is generally not a good idea.
Well, I think the remotes are
for making the game better.
I think the remotes are still perfectly fine units in the game because they're quite fast and they're often useful for the mission. So I think they're
the other remotes, but they wanted the other remotes. But I feel like in terms of keeping the game like tight, they did not need to put in the total reaction remote. Now, as it is right now, it feels almost mandatory because they removed the Suppressive Fire and everything like that to slow the opponent down on their turn. So that to me is kind of in my opinion, a negative, right, in the choices they did. And I think it's specifically because they're like, oh, we want to redo the remotes and sell them as part of Code 1 as a starter thing, because it also gives a lot of character in terms of what you look at the army, right? That they're not all just infantry. They have some robots that are running around as well.
You got your robot support backing you up.
Mm-hmm. So it looks cooler when you look at the army, but I think adding that total reaction and the boxes that they sell always come with a total reaction bot, right? So they're like, oh, well, we have to put that in, right? But again, that total reaction special rules are literally just for that one remote. And so if you're talking about trying to pare things down to be simple, they didn't need to add them. And the even more egregious thing about in terms of complication, right? And like we said, they're trying to keep the cognitive overhead low, but they also added in helper bots, which is literally the only G-Sync robots in the game, and G-Sync is really complicated.
Yeah, basically it means you activate at the same time as like you have a controller and the G-Sync little robot, and they activate at the same time. But because it's so normally only one model activates at a time in Code 1, mm-hmm. like Infinity has multiple things activate at the same time through a whole bunch of situations. Yeah. But in Code 1, it's the only situation where two things move at once, and the number of rules that need to be explained to allow you to react to two different things moving, it's just so long. Yeah, I would agree that was not needed.
Yeah, and like if you strip that out, you could easily fit in the Suppressive Fire rule and maybe even the guts check, right?
Yep, but it just comes down to being able to use the models that exist in the box. So
yeah, again, I feel like they wanted to sell these support guys, and the support guys, because they're both sold for Code 1 and the more complicated N4, they had to give you an ability to use those remotes, right? And so they had to put in that rule, I feel like, because literally those remotes are not needed for Code 1. Like, there's no reason to have them in the game, but they are, so whatever. All right, so do we have anything else to want to talk about complication? About Code 1? Do you think that people will bounce off of the game, in terms of how complicated Code 1 is?
Well,
I feel like it will. Yeah, go on.
I think if they're willing to play the full game, they won't. So I think whoever can handle Code 1 can pretty much handle the whole game, but it comes down to whether they have enough time to play the whole game. If let's say that player who's interested in this style of like really deep tactical skirmish game is, if they're into that gameplay, but they don't have enough time on their hands to keep up with the game or just get in games all the time or build tons of models, like they would enjoy Code 1 if they play once a month or like once every 2 months. They can keep it in their head. But if they've got the time to play once a week, they're just going to move up to the full version of the game.
That's true. I think it's a good filtering kind of thing where, like, if you can't take if you don't like Code 1, you're very unlikely to like N4, right? The main game, right? But it's true that I think there are going to be people like Code 1 more, right? And in some ways, I do like Code 1 more because it's removed a lot of the things and the extraneous things, and especially link teams, which I think are a curse on Infinity in general, in the way that they are now, right? I don't like the idea of linked teams. I really dislike the implementation. And
Yep.
so, yep.
So I think my biggest dislike of Code 1 is what draws a lot of people, including me, into Infinity is the look of the game and being able to make an army that looks how you want to, and because there's just so many different aesthetics out there that it's going to aesthetics going to really appeal to you in a certain one of the armies.
Yeah,
I want to be able to get that, and a lot of people want their army to look a certain way. So with the reduced number of factions and the reduced number of troops available, you lose that in Code 1. Not that things don't look cool, but there's one thing, if you're really set on it, you just can't have it.
Yeah, I do feel like, to me, the biggest thing is the limited number of factions. 4 factions, like we said, in terms of the overall aesthetics of the game, the 4 factions they chose 3 of them are really similar, right? And I do think that's going to be solved because they did say maybe they're only releasing 2 a year. They're going to be adding in factions, right? Until I think they get all main factions. So next year, I think they're going to add 2 more factions that hopefully look significantly differently. And I think that can really help kind of, get people excited and drag them in, right? But I do agree that the more homogeneity of 3 of the 4 factions that they chose to put in definitely is hurting Code 1.
Yeah, and for players like us that play the game more, being able to create an army that's really different than everybody else's army is a big appeal. So once you start playing more, the full version of the game becomes way more appealing.
Yeah, for me, I don't find that as big of a deal, but maybe it's because I like that kind of 10-man kind of look with a bunch of heavy armor and stuff like that. Even when I played Hack, I liked having a couple of tough guys. It's just that I had way more light infantry.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I typically don't play with very solid armies. I usually play with more armies that are sneaky and can sustain losses and then make some unexpected strike rather than just be you take the territory and you keep marching forwards. And I'm I don't feel like that.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, it's definitely there's a difference in the way we play, right? About whether you like that kind of style, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I could see how that's an issue for some people.
Yep. But as I said, right. I think the biggest factor is just how much time the player has to dedicate to the game.
All right. Yep, I think that's true. Do we want to talk a little bit now? We played 4 games of Code 1 so far. Mm-hmm. Do we have any general, just direct thoughts personally of how you felt about the game and what you enjoyed and what you, I guess we talked generally about what we enjoyed and what we didn't enjoy, but in terms of personally, how it affected, what you thought about the game?
So I felt like it played quite a bit differently because, as you said, I usually play a different style. So being forced into taking more expensive units changed the play style a lot. And I found that units, because we said there's less defensive tech, that really the Rambo units become much more significant in the game. Which, I mean, for some people really like that, but I'm not. Well, I like playing like that once in a while to switch it up, but that's not my normal play style. But choosing your Rambo units becomes very important, and having them be really beefy or just really having just being really killy, not just because the normal version of the game you can attack from lots of angles and have more medium-sized things accomplishing lots of stuff. Now
you also have coordinated orders to allow you to move guys up, so when your main guy who dies attacks, the other guys are not going to be significantly far behind.
Yes, there's a bunch of ways to move multiple guys at once, whereas now you move one guy at once, so whoever that one guy is becomes more important. So I found the game focused a lot on taking out your opponent's Rambo unit or just being really successful with yours. You may want to have multiple Rambo units, which is it's fairly, if you're going to play that style in regular Infinity or in Code 1, you probably want more than one in case it comes down to the luck of the dice. It comes down to the dice. You might just lose it and you want to have a backup one, or maybe it's just out of position, so it's better to send the other. If you've got one, say, on your left side, one on your right side, you may just choose based on the position. But I find you have to have those pieces to be successful so far.
I'm not sure I fully agree, actually. I feel like because I think it's more just the difference in gameplay, that if you are trying to play in the normal N3 kind of style, but without all of these tools that you have, you're not going to be successful. And I do feel like I started playing basically more conservatively. Like you can still Rambo, right? But for me, when I was playing more conservatively, it really helped. It really helped in terms of like success in playing, right? Not moving 3 or 4 guys, or not trying to fully Rambo with one guy and then leaving all the guys behind, which I had that problem when I started Infinity, right? I would Rambo with one group and they die, and I hadn't spent the time to move the rest of my army. So I ended up being, even though initially I was doing really well, I kind of fell off because I had all my other guys are out of position. And so in this one, I think it's still the same, where like, yeah, you can Rambo really hard with your one person, right? Especially if they're in a good spot. But if you literally just spend all your orders on one guy to kill an extra person, you are then out of position in the overall game, because just like in normal Infinity, Code 1 is not just about killing, right? The mission is the priority, right? And there's like a bunch of missions where it's not even, I guess that technically there's only one mission in the book that is not even about killing at all, right?
Yeah, it's all about grabbing stuff.
It's all about grabbing stuff. And so, but a bunch of the other missions are not technically fully about killing. It's about killing the right people at the right time. So I think just like in the other game, you need to balance just going Ramboing with moving your guys up to be ready, right, for what happens next. And I do still think that kind of gameplay not as is still important. And I still think it's probably more optimal than just choosing one guy and, like you said, just hoping that they never die and just kill everyone. And the other thing is that the one guy you choose to go Rambo, because you only have 10 orders, and because just because of the units you're able to choose, I don't think you're going to be able to fully Rambo if your opponent is playing more defensively to counter that, right? And I think like hiding and stuff like that to waste your orders. So I think it actually does, just choosing one Rambo guy and hoping that they can like make it all the way through is probably going to be tougher.
Oh yeah. That's why I said you probably want more than one for different situations and just for different locations.
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like I think we just need that thing. I think we need to play more to fully see how it works out.
Because often the Rambo units will be those things that are more susceptible to hacking. So once you figure out hacking more, right. Already from the armies I've taken, I take high hacking coverage. As you played against me, I take.
Yeah, but yeah, it was interesting though. It definitely was interesting. And when I played against Leo, the ability for hacking to like modify the game was definitely significantly more than the previous, like in N3, partially because I think the hacking program has basically gone a little bit stronger and more versatile.
Even in N2 versus like 30.
Yes, exactly. But also partially because, like you said, heavy infantry, like the things that hacking affects are needed more in the way that the game plays. So there is more of like, by limiting everything, the ability for like there to be a kind of a rock, paper, scissors kind of idea, so that you always have a chance to like hit someone in the right spot. I felt that there was more of that than there was in N3, especially because there are no link teams. Just want to emphasize that.
Yeah, because now you're not just using, now you don't just turn things super powered by putting them in a link and then having them kill things. So
yeah. Or the other way to play, which is honestly very, very useful in the other game, was spamming camo. It'll actually be interesting to see in the new game in N4, this is kind of getting a little bit outside of Code 1, that they've also limited the number of people in tournament games, that the units you can take, to 15.
Which I think is how people are going to play because it's sort of, the tournaments are based on the mission pack, and everybody usually plays the missions they put out. So I think
there's a lot, and they're just fun. They're just fun to play, and there's a lot of
That's the
them.
format most people play in. So now most people are going to be down at the 15 level versus when I looked at my lists, I was looking at like 16 to 18 things on the board because I just liked having orders to accomplish things from different angles versus just knowing that I would use one thing to accomplish most of the goal.
And I do wonder though, because there's only 15 orders on the table, if sectorials and link teams are going to dominate. Because
now
15 order list is about where link teams are the strongest. 15 order lists. So, like in the old game, they've weakened a lot of the things that made vanilla armies that couldn't take link teams strong. Like it seems like camo is becoming more expensive, which is one of the main strengths of how much camo spam you could do in a vanilla list. And it seems like warbands are weaker.
Because now you don't have as many slots, because they were really cheap guys, but they wouldn't add to your activations from your orders. So yeah, now that you start taking those, you now start losing orders that you can normally spend. Whereas before,
so I feel like it's going to make link teams basically dominant. And maybe I'll be wrong, right? But it sounds like the ability for vanilla, and to be fair, in the old game, I think vanilla was stronger overall than link teams. But I don't think with the changes they did, they're going to be as strong as links as they are right now, because they basically said we're going to have the same link rules as we did in second edition.
Yeah. So for the Code 1 people,
that's 2 editions ago, by the way. Just
so for the Code 1 people who are just thinking about Code 1, the war bands, which are basically cheap guys that don't add to your order pool, they are not in Code 1, but they're a good piece of defensive tech because you don't care if they die so much.
Yes. So I think, that is another thing, that they don't have in Code 1. It changes it. So overall, what did you feel about Code 1? Did you like it?
I felt like the middle got carved out of like the middle class of units. Because
really?
Because responding there, because there's template weapons in the game, which are auto hit if you respond with them. It's like using a shotgun or using just like spray and pray up close that puts down that teardrop template. You now get an auto hit. So even if their good guy gets to you and shoots your crappy guy, if you've got one of those template weapons to fire back with, that's your best choice to respond often. So now rather than having a guy that may have some defensive tech, whether it was Suppressive Fire, whether you're using the link, whether it was those crappy cheap guys who don't give you orders, with all of those gone to no longer roadblock people, your middle of the road guys are now more exposed. And whenever they hit you, if you've got those guys, you're now losing more points off the board every time you get hit.
I kind of disagree again. I don't know. It might be just the definition of what you're saying middle guys are, but the fact that you only have 10 guys means that you don't, like middle guys on the offense can take out heavy guys, right? It's on defense where they're significantly weaker because generally they have lower armor and less wounds, right? So I think because you only have 10 guys, and like we said, you only have 25 points, I think the medium guys are actually still decent, right? As a support piece to, let's say your heavy guy is dead, a medium guy can finish the job. Your grunts, who are generally there just to fill out your army and mostly on a defensive kind of thing, they are less able to finish the job than your middling guys. And also, what do you consider camo? The 20 point or the 2 or 3 point guys. I actually brought a bunch of 2 or 3 point guys in my list.
Yeah, so I consider camo an entirely different class of thing because it is actually it's a big form of defensive tech that is one of the ones that still exists in Code 1. Because as we said, you've got to discover the thing by making a whip along them to get to the thing.
Yeah.
That if they fail that, they can't attack it. So it's just more steps to be able to attack those things. So
what is your definition though of a middling guy? Because there are a lot of different types, right? You have camo guys, right? Camo infiltrators. Then you have guys with 2 wounds, but there's a difference in guys with 2 wounds as well, right? There's a guys with 2 wounds that are 2 or 3 points and then there are guys with 2 wounds that are like 5 points, right?
It's basically guys who are like who don't have camo and who don't have 2 wounds who are in that 2 to 3 point range.
There are not that many of them, though.
No, they're not, but their role is much harder to find. It's harder to find a rule.
I'm just thinking about who they are. They're generally like. I'm just looking at Code 1. I can only think about the heroes, right? And they're good at close combat or whatever. Although, like technically, because of how they translated the heroes, some of the heroes kind of are. Because they've limited the number of rules that are in the game, the heroes are expensive but underwhelming. But to me, that's more about the fact that in the main game, they have a special rule that makes them more survivable, and they don't have that in it's literally they're the same points, but they don't have the rule that makes them like way more survivable, which is a problem. But like, if they had NWI, all the heroes, which I think most of the heroes actually should in the main game, I think they'd be fine.
Yeah, that's a lot of the units that had, for the people who only play Code 1, NWI is basically like another wound. It's like having 2 wounds. But if you lose that wound, you're just off the board. If you lose the second wound, the guy goes right off the board and can't be healed. But yeah, they often, like, they kept the points, for people who did have NWI, they kept the points similar, but the NWI just disappeared. So it's like they lost half their wounds and didn't get a discount.
Yeah, so to me, I think that's more of an issue about points for these characters and about the limits than the actual medium guy. Like, a lot of these guys should probably have been 1.5 points, right? Or 2 points, and then they end up being, it's like these guys that you're saying middling guys should be 1.5 or 2, but they ended up being, just because of the translation, 2 or 2.5 or even 3, right?
Yeah, and there were a lot of guys who before might have had more equipment, but because that equipment doesn't exist in Code 1, their points often stayed sort of relatively the same compared to everything else, and they didn't get discounted for the fact that they no longer have half their equipment. So.
Yeah, so I do feel like, in some ways, if they do end up rebalancing points, I think it'll be fine. Like,
yeah, I do, but those are kind of those middling guys I'm talking about for those 2 reasons.
But I still think they have a reason for existing, assuming their price is priced correctly. Like, basically as another attack piece that is a backup attack piece, right?
Yep.
Which makes sense.
But before, you might have put those models closer to the front line because they had weapons to deal with lots of situations. But now, and more defensive tech from the Suppressive Fire rule from link teams. But now you don't want those guys near your front line if they're going to be a secondary attack piece. You want them held further back so that they're not targeted. You want more of the crap trash. You want more of like the cheap guys on the front line who can respond with templates.
Kind of. But at the same time, it really depends on how you're playing, right? I guess we're getting into tactics now, right? You want them as close as possible without them easily being attacked, right? Yeah, but technically, that's the same thing for everyone, right?
You want them to be like maybe on a roof, so if they're not being watched, they can climb down. You just want something. You don't want them accessible to your opponent because they're worth enough points that your opponent will go after them, and they're dangerous to your opponent. So you want to keep either you have roadblocks in front of them, or they're on roofs, or something to keep them.
Yeah, exactly. Like, or if you're going, you want to make the rest of your army go around so that they're less likely to be hit by your opponent's strongest attack piece, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's generally fine, honestly. And a lot of, honestly, the what you called them what, medium, or you called them
middle of the road guys, whatever.
Middle of the road guys. A lot of them do have templates to defend themselves against like cheap infiltrating guys who are most likely the first types to attack. And the second and third turn, you can shift basically the battle lines with, depending on how you play, so that they're less likely to be just murdered. So I do think there's a role for them, but I agree that you do have to be more careful, and I would say that a couple of them are too expensive.
Yeah.
Especially because I think maybe it's some sort of points formula where armor is now like, I feel like armor with 2 wounds is now valued correctly, but like if you have half the wounds, armor is not worth as much, right?
Yeah.
So that's basically it.
Yeah, I think mines also be, like I said, camo. Excuse me, camo became more important. I think mines that which do also appear in camo form became more important because it's a way of getting more objects on the board
Defensive,
that your opponent
yeah,
has to
and more
worry about.
defensive tech.
Yeah, it's one of the
Considering
defensive.
there's, yeah,
Plus, those cheap guys are no longer available. That before might just run out in front of the mine and just take it in the face to
mm-hmm.
clear the minefield. Now you're using like more expensive guys, and you've got fewer orders. So whoever has to go
Yeah,
deal with the mine, it's now more of a nuisance to your opponent losing orders to go deal with this thing.
mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
that's become more. It just become more important for whatever defensive tech is still left.
yeah. Okay, yeah. So overall, I guess would you? So I guess we both agree it's a great intro game and it's a great way to test out if you like Infinity. Would you feel like um, for other people, I guess for you, would you continue to play it, and the second thing is, do you think that for some people this is the right game to just continue to play?
Yeah, I think that's so your second point about it being the right game for some people.
Mm-hmm.
For the people who like that gameplay style, but maybe they only have normally time for video games and can only get the game in once in a while, but they really like that deep tactical like board positioning game,
Mm-hmm.
that it's the game for them to play if they're only playing
Yeah.
like once a month, or less.
Mm-hmm.
And I would keep it up just for the sake of those people and for the sake of introducing other people to the game.
Mm. Okay, so for you, it's more about introducing people to the greater game, but for you, N4 is kind of the way to go. Like it's the end goal for you, and for the experience that you want with Code One.
Yeah, just for being able to vary the
Okay.
armies and for just the gameplay style.
Okay. Yeah. For me, I actually like Code One quite a bit, and I think it's possibly because I care more about like paring down the game, and I think that is an important part. Or I feel like Infinity just needs to get pared down, right? I think a better version of Infinity is one with less rules, but with the right, like we've mentioned throughout this thing, with the right chosen rules, not just like, and not, I guess, not paring down things based on whether you want to sell the model or not, right? That's just for me personally. And I like the fact they don't have links, which is awesome. And I really want to, yeah, that's true.
They sounded like they're open to suggestions and play testing things. So,
Mm-hmm.
and that they're not going to rush to create new ones because the game just is about to release new rules. So they're not going to be in a rush to change it.
Yeah, and I feel like the size of the table is totally under, I don't know. To me, it can't be undersold. Like, it is super great to me to have a 32 by 48 table and make the game work really, like, play like how I expect an Infinity game to play. And I think the important thing, like, about Code 1 versus N4 is overall, I feel like I get basically almost everything that I get from Infinity in terms of the feeling and being able to put the units on the table. I get almost all of that feeling. And I think and I gain a whole bunch of these other things where I feel like it's totally worth it. Even if like that was the only game I played, it's pretty close to the ideal version of Infinity that I would want. Right. And I don't know, like N4 hasn't come out, right? So I'm just comparing to N3, but like there is a world where I feel like I would prefer to play Code 1 over N4. Now, I don't think that's going to happen, especially because, you know, we play every week, but we play in a group where almost certainly they're all going to want to play mostly N4, right? Because they're all a bunch of veterans and things like that. And we are playing every week. So I do feel like that's going to be the future, but I do feel like if it was just up to me, I would almost consider taking Code 1 and tweaking a few things, then using N4 and technically, or using N4 and tweaking things. I do.
You would probably play a lot of other games though at the same time as Code 1, whereas these other players in our group are mostly exclusively playing Infinity.
That is true,
So,
right?
so for you,
So
like
to
it
me,
would fit really well. And for
yeah.
me, like I like playing lots of different games, which
Mm-hmm.
involves possibly having to go to the game store multiple times a week.
Mm-hmm.
But I like having that deeper game,
Mm-hmm.
which the full version of the game gives, and then but the rest of the games I play, I don't want them to be anywhere near that
Yeah.
deep because it's too
Yeah,
much.
I would say I get the general feeling of Infinity, and there is less deepness, but I do feel like there is still a lot of strategy that I feel like the way I play the game, like I generally win or lose for the same reasons I win or lose in Infinity. And I don't feel like I will max out my strategic ability in Code 1 to such a point where, like, I think the rules are deep enough that uh, you will probably not become an expert of Code 1 in where you're playing against someone and the only reason either of you won is because, like, it becomes a solved game and the only reason anyone wins is because of the dice rolls. I feel like it's complicated enough that the skill or the skill or the play of the correct play on the table is going to matter enough that it becomes an interesting and tactile and deep thinking game. That's just the way that I feel like uh, in general about the game.
Yeah,
But I
yeah,
do think
awesome.
that so I did though. I did mention that Suppressive Fire was something that I really miss in the main game, and we did try for the fourth game with Leo to just to add that into the game, and
Yeah,
also allowing one person to have Suppressive Fire at the start of the game, which is something they added to the main rules, right?
yeah. If you're the player that goes second.
Yeah, and I feel like with adding that thing in, I think Code One is probably enough for like to get the overall feeling. And like I did mention, there's a couple of things that I would want to port from the original game, but for the cost of the extra complication, I don't think it's necessarily needed.
Yeah, no, I would agree. That suppressive fire rule makes it play much more similarly to the full version of the game. Without it, like I think the tactical changes you have to make are quite large to
Mm-hmm.
sort of do to
Yeah,
tactically play one game versus the other game.
I do feel like adding that ability to suppress means that there's more options than playing just cat and mouse.
Yeah. You
So
don't reach out, take something, then you have to like pull your paw back. Otherwise, you leave it exposed.
that's basically it. Um, overall, I'd say Code One is great. I think it's actually better than after playing it than it seemed when I read the rules.
Mm-hmm.
I
So yeah, I will build multiple armies for it just to be able to
mm-hmm,
introduce players.
mm-hmm,
Because the new player may want to buy an army based on its look, which may not be one of the Code One armies. So for getting other people into the game, whatever form they end up wanting to play,
mm-hmm.
would want to own multiple Code One armies myself
These
to
two.
demo. To demo, yeah.
So which one are you going to play?
Okay, fine. It's just going to be two. It's not going to be the ones that you like. Yes, it's going to be O12
Oh, okay. Yeah, it comes in
and Shazvasti. Partially because I
okay.
kickstarted another dungeon crawler game from the game
The same
maker that
company.
has a lot of the
Yeah.
models.
Yeah.
And I like the
Okay, that
look.
makes sense. Yeah, I'm gonna do Pano and Eugene,
Oh, good.
and I'm gonna
If we're both
try and get one of our other friends who's kind of bounced off Infinity before to play a little bit more and see if he likes it. But it seems like he's going the exact opposite direction, where he's like, "No, I want things even more simple and no measuring." So maybe it'll be impossible. But like you said, just having two armies, and of course all the models are great looking, so it's not too
yeah,
much of
well.
a loss.
Mhm. All right. Well, I think we covered like some deeper parts of the game for those who already played M3 and are considering what might be going on tactically with Code One, and just newer players
Mm-hmm.
for the fluff, the look, and all that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's been super long actually, this chat, but hopefully this has given you an insight into Code One and our thoughts on it. And if you're new to Infinity, a reason to go and start it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, if you have any thoughts on Code One or or questions or anything like that, find us on Facebook, send us an email, any of that kind of stuff, and we'll be sure to answer you.
Yep, maybe not with the paragraphs it takes to talk about tactics, but anything less than that.
All right, this has been Alan.
It's been Brandon.
All right, one more thing. So if you enjoyed that podcast and want to listen to more, you can find them over at diceovereverything.com
or on your favorite podcast app.
And if you want to leave a comment, message, or ideas for more podcasts from us,
just get in touch with us
at Facebook and look for Dice Over Everything there.
All right. Bye.